Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hi, I'm Pat O'Toole, news correspondent with the Irish Farmers Journal. After 10 days of farmers' protests in France, the country is turning away from imported meat products, and Irish factories are beginning to feel the pinch. My colleague, Thomas Hubert, talked to Noreen Lanigan, the head of Bord Bia in Paris.
It has been affecting Irish exports to France for over the last week. So the protests you're referring to started on Sunday, the 19th of July, but I suppose maybe to put things in context, the farmer situation there's been a certain amount of unrest amongst the farmers since maybe May, June in France already. And from a logistics perspective, trade has already been disrupted by issues at the port tunnel and in Calais for the last month or so. So we've already, even before the blockades that are now going on for over a week, we've already had some disruption to trade. And now in more recent days, the last week, I suppose, the disruption was both logistically and from a barrier to trade perspective. So logistically with blockades and making it difficult to access certain customers and also access certain cities, etc. From that perspective, things have eased to a certain extent. Today they're more concentrated on the German and the Spanish border, but they're still targeting specific customers and specific processors. From a trade barriers perspective, I suppose it's no secret that there's pressure, I suppose, on a lot of our French customers to support the French farmer movement, and hence that has a knock-on effect and is making it difficult to sell an Irish imported product into the market. So Irish exporters are reporting that their business is affected. Some are reporting that demand was sluggish anyway at this time of year, and particularly for customers based in Paris, as the French consumer migrates south to a certain extent. Some business with Parisian customers would be weaker at this time of year anyway. But yes, all the exporters are reporting difficulty.
Is this just as a result of protests, or is there a trend towards turning away from imported products? We've heard calls from the French government that public bodies should buy French. Is this translating into a fact already?
You know, I've been in France a number of years, Thomas, I think, as you're aware. So this is something quite cyclical in France that comes in waves. So it is a trend that has come and gone in the past, and that typically the economics of the market will sort out eventually. But obviously at moments when there's particular tension in the market, the government do make requests like that. But I don't think it's a long-term trend. I think there is obviously a need and a place for imported products in certain sectors, particularly in sectors where France isn't self-sufficient, like lamb. So long term, I have seen them make statements like this in the past, and we have turned things around. So long term, I don't think it's an issue, but it's obviously short term tactics.
How important is the French market for Irish meat processors? Is it very significant that this market is being affected at the moment? France
is globally our second biggest trading partner for all food and beverage products, and then more specifically on meat, it's our number one export market and has been historically for a number of years for lamb, and our second biggest market for beef. So it is very significant. Overall, between beef and lamb, that's approximately worth approximately 350 million euros. But as I said earlier, we don't have access to current CSO figures, and the bulk of the business would not be during the summer months. And I suppose the period to watch is the autumn months. And I suppose that's what we will be trying to monitor and feedback information to the Irish trade, because while it is difficult now, we're trying to get a view on how it will pan out towards the end of the year, when typically we would export more product to the market.
If you look at it from the French farmers' perspective, don't they have a point that after all, prices are bad, things are hard for them? Is it really hard in France to place product on the market, whether it's meat or dairy at the moment?
For starters, Thomas, you know, I'm not paid to take the French farmers' perspective, so I'm more concerned about the Irish farmers' perspective. But from a market perspective at the moment, as I said, the market is very sluggish from a food sales perspective. Generally, we talk here about food deflation rather than inflation, and certainly a lot of categories, including meat, aren't performing well. The latest Kantar figures that I have at hand are up to the middle of May. In May, Kantar were stating that the beef category was reporting sales that were down 5.3% in retail, with a slight increase in price, 0.6%, but volume was down 5.3%. And pork sales were down 2.3%, with a slight moderate increase of 0.5% in price. And then lamb was the worst affected, down 15.8% volume-wise and up 2.9% in price. So that's, I suppose, the current background or the backdrop there, the market conditions. So hence it's a difficult market, whether you're a local supplier or an imported supplier, to make a good return in at the moment.
Okay. Noreen Lanigan, thank you very much. No migration to the southern beaches for Bord Bia staff at the moment, I would say.
Unless the south of Ireland, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Bye.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
I'm joined by my colleague Andy Doyle, and we're going to discuss the harvest and how it's proceeding. Andy, St. Swithin's Day was dry, which was good news, but since then we've had a lot of rain. Progress has been very slow.
I think we've probably broken that myth this year, Pat. Certainly harvest has been very difficult in most parts of the country, but that said, people are getting some cutting done in different areas, so that you can never assume that a wet day means no progress. But there's still a relatively small amount of the total harvest done. Even in many parts where they've managed to get the grain cut, straw hasn't been baled, it's sitting in rows waiting to be moved. It's just extremely awkward. And now we have a situation where crops that have been burnt off or just are ripe now for a week, 10 days at this stage, they're starting to break down, and people they're being forced in just to try and get the crop cut before the heads hit the ground.
A lot of corn seems to have been sprayed off. Are farmers in danger of assuming with the winter crop that they're going to get the weather? And if you burn off too much of your corn, are you risking bad patch of weather, significant losses?
Pat, there's always a risk, but there's a risk of it just being overripe, regardless of the fact that you've sprayed it off. The general feeling would be that if you have sprayed it off, that risk is probably exaggerated. So, like, my advice to people always would be that you burn off what you have to, where you have lots of unevenness or where you have a lot of late tillers on headlands, that kind of stuff. But to me, burning off should be kept to the minimum rather than the maximum, just as a good husbandry technique.
What's quality like and what's yield like?
Pat, they're both variable, and that's probably the best way to say it. Yields are, I think one must say, from under 3, and at this stage some of those crops have unfortunately been there and been cut, to significantly over 5. There's a regional thing going on. Certainly it's difficult to get good yields, really big yields down in the southeast corner. There are problems, or there have been problems down there with barley yellow dwarf virus all year. Same problems have occurred up along the east coast, up into County Louth, and I was talking to people yesterday in Louth who would have had crops that were fairly badly hit. You know, they were probably doing 3.5 tonne an acre, but there are crops all around them that were cleaner, or further inland that were cleaner, and they're doing a good bit more, the 4+ mark. There's a lot of talk this year of 5s, and there are, thankfully, plenty 5s out there, but it certainly would be very wrong to think that they are the norm. 4 odds is where we're sitting at the moment, and whether the early part of the harvest will prove to be the best of it or the worst of it, only time will tell. Quality then is equally as variable. People would tell me that they've had samples in under 60, which is not good for barley. They would probably be coming from some of that land that was badly hit with barley yellow dwarf virus, etc. I was talking to a man down south yesterday, and he said that, you know, the overall fill was low. It wasn't that they had just poor grains in some of it, that it just didn't fill as well as it should. Whether it was excessive rain at a critical stage or just not enough heat during the grain fill period in that part of the country, nobody really knows. But, you know, what is. But on, you know, overall, though, quality is still as good as the yield, hitting in the 62, 68 bracket. More of them in the 62, 65 bracket, is fair to say, but quite a number of the crops that came in early came in with bits of awns still attached. They weren't fully mature. They may have been dry, but they weren't fully mature. and that affected KPHs. And when guys literally did a hand test on them and they scrubbed them again by hand and put them back in, they were rising 4, 5, 6 points on the KPH scale. Moistures are probably higher than they would normally be for winter barley as well, because people are having to go on the half chance just to try and get fields in. So while winter barley would frequently come in on the 16, 17, 18 bracket, certainly this year we have a lot of 18, 21, 22s and a few 24s and 5s being reported from different places.
You mentioned straw, that it's difficult to get it up. No huge demand for straw, is there?
No huge demand for straw, Pat, no. I saw straw in the northern end of the country baled up earlier this week, baled into big bales, and invariably that's heading north. There's always a demand and a need for straw in the north of Ireland, but a lot of my friends that live kind of on the western periphery of the tillage area say that there's not too many people from west of them coming looking for straw, and people will have some serious decisions to make as to what they're going to do with it.
The economics of chopping, diesel's coming down, which is a factor when you're chopping straw, but with the cost of phosphates at the moment and the value of straw back in the crop, would you be recommending farmers strongly consider incorporation? I
think if people don't have a real prospect of being able to sell their straw and know where it's going to be sold, I think that it's a fool's paradise to be putting straw in with just based on an optimistic hunch with so much fodder about the place, particularly when so many of these fields are now very badly worn, the land has gone tight, it needs some form of organic matter. But chopping straw, there is a cost to it, unquestionably. There's a double cost to it, actually, because if you chop the straw, it will take more diesel and slow the combine. There's a cost on that end of it, but realistically, you must subsequently try and get it incorporated before you get to the point of primary tillage for establishment. So you need to get soil mixed with the straw to begin the breakdown process. But having straw there, particularly if you're putting straw on top for spring crops, it is amazing what it will do to a field over the winter period. If you can have enough of greenery there to satisfy the green cover, when you have that feast of food there for earthworms, even if you only have a few of them, when you have that feast, they will multiply. And in a space of a few years, you'll begin to see the difference. And one of the differences in time, you have the fertility issue, but in my opinion, that's a very slow process. The big difference in time is that you change how your soil behaves, and that's less diesel requirement for the future, regardless of its price.
We've saved price till last, and markets, unfortunately, it's not the best news, is it?
No, markets are still under significant pressure, unfortunately. I thought when we had the spike in early July that the overall appearance of things at that stage looked as if that might be able to hold. But since then, most reports of harvesting that has been done to date have come in at or above expectation rather than below. And that's telling the market that, at least so far, that there's going to be plenty of grain everywhere. There are concerns, not everything is harvested yet by a long shot. There would be lots of concerns for parts of the European Union where excessive heat would have affected the end of grain fill. There would be concerns as well with regard to the continuous wet that's occurring in the Midwest and the States, where the bulk of the US corn is produced, that if it came dry after all of this wet, the crops have very poor roots and a small drought could cause havoc. But that's speculation, that's not fact until it happens, and that's where the markets are dealing from today when they're forming an opinion on price.
Thank you very much.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Now let's hear from an unusual dairy farmer from Northern Ireland. Our Northern editor, David Wright, talked to Brian McCracken, who is making the most of grass on his farm, despite the tough conditions in his area.
I'm from a farm outside between Belfast and Newtownards. Ground runs from 450 to 700 feet above sea level, so we have a limited tonnage of grass we can grow in the year. We moved to a spring calving system in 2000 and have been there ever since, and I'm very happy with the system. It's something I'm interested in. We are more in control of our inputs and our output, and we have bred the type of stock that suits the system. New Zealand Friesian, Kiwi Cross, and will continue to do so. And they have brought us fertility, production, fat and protein, milk solids, which has given us insulation from the milk price that we're facing today. and that is a key component. It'll give me 3p a litre bonus over the year, which means I'll survive and prosper for the next year. That's the aim, and I enjoy what I do, and I suppose there's challenges in it, weather and everything else that brings with it, but those are sort of things that we do in our farm.
You didn't go down the high input route. Why not? What was the big driver in your decision making process that you went the way you've went? Because it's not necessarily typical of what's happening in the industry here.
Yeah. Well, our changes would have been happened in the late 90s. We came to a point that we were sitting about 100, 110 cows, and where do we go with breeding at that stage? We're sitting with an block autumn calving herd, and am I interested in chasing yields through the winter? I was more exposed to discussion groups that I was in and heading south to some of the farms, visiting farms down there, the higher, very progressive farms. And it stirred an interest in that system for me, and I believe that I enjoyed it. So hence, if you're enjoying it, you're in to aim to excel at it. That's what I was taught to do. It's something I wanted to do, and that's why.
Yeah. And Brian, where do you see the industry going forward in terms of obviously milk price under pressure at the minute? Are you confident about the future? Have you family coming through? Where's your farm going? In the next few years?
As milk price is a challenge, I hope for this year, but in the future it will continue to be. It'll be volatile. We'll have a roller coaster of milk prices because we're an exporting country, and that's not going to change. So hence, I need to insulate myself from that. We'll make money in the good years and we'll survive the tight years. I think in general we need to look at cost of production on farm, use grass strategically, and I think there's opportunities for everybody to do so, even to lift milk quality, hence lifting their milk price.
Brian, thank you very much. Brilliant.
Okay, thank you.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Finally, let's turn to the Irish Country Living Desk to find out what is making headlines in rural Ireland this week.
Hi, I'm Ciara Leahy, consumer editor in Irish Country Living, and I'm here with Mary Phelan, who's one of the journalists in Irish Country Living. And this week she is writing about dating. Now, this is a series that Mary's been running for the last few weeks, and this week the focus is on dating post-divorce. Mary, it can be hard for people to put themselves out there, especially, as many people who are divorced may not have dated for a really long time. What did you find in your research?
Well, I guess the main thing about people at this stage of life is they're carrying a lot more emotional baggage than they would have been maybe in their late teens and early 20s. This baggage comes in the form of children, their families, maybe their parents are aging, and health, both their physical, I guess, and emotional more so, and mental health.
And I guess finances as well.
They have young children. Yeah. They're rearing a family. With divorce comes with it some financial complications as well. But children, I guess, is the main factor that will maybe stop people from dating, or certainly make them maybe not as interested. I spoke to Dr. Paul Dalton. He's president of the Psychological Society of Ireland, and he was saying that guilt is a huge thing that people who are divorced carry with them in terms of dating when they have young kids. He said it's very normal to feel like this, but it's one that can definitely hamper them, certainly in starting a new relationship, but really it can get in the way of finding happiness. And he said the important thing is to recognise it and just realise really that, even your children just want you to be happy. So I guess to try and park that guilt to an extent.
Absolutely. What other advice did he have for people dating post-divorce?
Well, in terms of the kids, I should have mentioned as well that, he's advised that a little bit of information quite often can help. He's like, kids at the end of the day, really their bottom line is, how is this going to affect me? So if you give them lots of information and lots of reassurance, then at least they're starting from a platform where they kind of know what's going on. Also, the thing about dating at this stage is that really you should be quite open-minded. Online dating is not something that this bracket really would have encountered. They were married probably before, or they were certainly seeing maybe their potential spouse before online dating came along. And he says that, they should be more open-minded about this, that the dating scene has really, really changed. And especially a lot of people, I guess, who are divorced are actually in their 50s, and the dating scene will have changed massively for them. And it's to be ready to move into the digital age. He noted that a lot of people of this age don't even have email addresses, so they can't even set up dating profiles. But he says a lot of people find it quite hostile out there. They find bars and clubs quite hostile. They kind of go out very fresh-faced and optimistic, and then a few nights out on the town, they really see what the dating scene is like, and they're quite quite disappointed. But before you even get to that stage, his advice was that people should give themselves approximately 12 to 18 months before dating again.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say to you. Like, you know, that you need to have that time probably afterwards before you can even get onto the scene.
Yeah, exactly. He was saying people need to be comfortable in their own company. They need to be happy by themselves and certainly give themselves at least 12 to 18 months. He said men will approximately, and this is actually according to Rena Maycock, she's the director of Intro Matchmaking, who I also spoke to. She said men will wait a year after marriage breakdown before looking at seeing someone else, and women will wait on average 3 years.
Wow. But I suppose it's kind of good advice that's applicable even if you're just out of a long-term relationship. Maybe it wasn't even marriage, to give yourself time. One last thing, Mary, you know, it was really interesting to hear about, you know, technology, but if you're listening to this and thinking, or, you know, reading your article and thinking, you know what, I hear you, but the online dating is just not for me, or you might have tried it and went, no, it's just, I'm not feeling it. What other options? What about dating agencies? Are they any good?
Yeah, exactly. So as I said, I spoke to Rena Maycock, the director of Intro Matchmaking, and she was saying, you know, the large majority of people coming to her who are divorced are in their 50s. That's who she's kind of dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But she was saying, you know, people approaching her, they're even kind of reluctant. They might have come to her, but they're nearly reluctant about it. And she said she might meet somebody in a hotel in a big rural town, and they're looking around them, you know, as will somebody see me, as if they're doing a drug deal. But sure, nobody knows who Rena is. No one knows that she's the director of a matchmaking agency or a dating agency as such. But Rena had some very interesting things to say, and she said that people really need to manage their expectations when they do come to her. And she had some interesting stats, and one of them was that the average height of men in Ireland is 5'7.5". So if you're a woman of over 5'7" in height in Ireland, your options are severely limited. And her dating agency,
unless you're willing to
go shorter, I guess. But she was saying that they will guarantee to match women with somebody who is 2 inches taller than them. But that's 2 inches taller than you in your bare stocking feet. That's not when you're wearing heels. She also said that, you know, people need to be willing to travel about 90 minutes to meet somebody, because you have a lot more women in urban areas and you have a lot more men in rural areas. And she said that for every professional woman in Ireland, there is 0.6 of a professional man, if that makes sense. And this is because a lot of men go into farming and they go into trade. So if you're a professional woman and you approach Rena and say, I want to meet a professional man, Rena kind of says, well, look, I can't guarantee that. And if that's kind of your mindset, not 100% sure that it's going to work, we'll see what we can do, but you need to be a bit more open-minded.
Absolutely, and sure, there's plenty of eligible farmers out there.
Exactly,
you know?
Farmers Journal knows all about that. Another thing she said was that women over the age of 40 need to be willing to date men 8 years their senior. When men get to their late 30s, apparently they become obsessed with enormous age gaps.
Right.
So yeah, quite interesting.
That's very interesting. So all that information is in this week's Irish Country Living. It's Mary's article on dating post-divorce. And of course, if you're interested in this, also our Getting in Touch page in Irish Country Living is very popular. So, you know, you can meet your match that way. Thank you very much.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.